As the 2 week deadline approached, Ekene's desperation grew. He paced his apartment, mind racing, trying to conjure a way out of the trap he had set for himself. With just 2 days left, he made a frantic call to his friend, Mike. Mike, I need your help, Ekene pleaded. Remember that story I told you about this apartment belonging to a friend? Please, I need you to be that friend. Mike, sensing the urgency in Ekene's voice, agreed to the plan. On the appointed day, he burst into the apartment, feigning outrage. What's going on here? Mike bellowed, startling both Ekene and Carlo. Ekene, who is this person here with you in my house? So, because I allowed you to stay here while I was away, you decided to bring in another person, right? No problem. Now, I want everybody out. Get out before I call the police on both of you. Ekene played his part, acting shocked and apologetic. I'm so sorry. I thought you weren't back yet, Mike. But don't worry, we'll leave right away. Carlo, caught off guard, could only watch in confusion as they were hustled out of the apartment. Once on the street, Ekene turned to his brother, his face a mask of contrition. I'm so sorry, Carlo. I didn't expect him to be back so soon. Don't worry, we'll go to the bank now and sort everything out. Carlo, still suspicious but seeing no alternative, followed Ekene to a nearby bank. They entered the investment wing of the bank, where Ekene guided Carlo to a comfortable couch. Just wait here, Ekene said, his voice reassuring. I'll go speak with the investment manager and get everything finalized. It won't take long. Carlo nodded, settling into the couch. He watched as Ekene disappeared behind a frosted glass door. Minutes ticked by. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, and still there was no sign of Ekene. Carlo's unease grew. He approached a bank employee. Excuse me, please. I'm waiting for my brother. He went to speak with an investment manager about an hour ago. The employee looked confused. Sir, our investment managers haven't had any appointments today. And that door you pointed at leads to the fire exit. Carlo's blood ran cold as the truth hit him. Ekene had fled, leaving him stranded at the bank, just like he did at the airport. His face turned red with anger as he quickly made for the exit door in search of Ekene. He got downstairs and ran up and down the street, hoping to miraculously sight Ekene, but Ekene was nowhere in sight. Even his car that he drove both of them to the bank with was not there anymore. Carlo swore under his breath. Ekene, if I set my eyes on you, I'll make sure you bleed to death, he said furiously. Meanwhile, Ekene was across town, breathless as he pounded on Mike, his friend's door. Let me in, Mike. I need a place to stay. Quickly, Mike opened the door and allowed him in. As a good friend of his who always spent money on hosting him when they visited nightclubs and fancy restaurants, Mike told Ekene that he could stay in his house for as long as he wanted. As night fell over Lagos, the brothers were in vastly different situations. Carlo, filled with rage and disbelief, began his search for Ekene anew. This time, with the bitter knowledge of just how far his brother's deception had gone. Ekene, on the other hand, hiding in his friend's spare room, was consumed by fear and guilt, knowing that his web of lies had finally collapsed. The confrontation that Ekene had so desperately tried to avoid was now inevitable. As Lagos bustled around them, the two brothers were set on a collision course. Carlo, driven by a thirst for justice and answers, would not rest until he found Ekene, and Ekene, trapped by his own lies, would soon discover that there was nowhere left to run. So as the night fell over Lagos, Carlo found himself alone on the bustling streets, the weight of Ekene's betrayal crushing down on him. He pulled out his phone, desperately dialing Ekene's number again and again, only to be met with the same automated message. The number you have dialed is currently switched off. Frustration and anger boiled within him. How could he do this to me? Carlo muttered, clenching his fist. My own brother. What is he hiding from me? I hope it's not what I'm suspecting, Carlo said. Then reality set in harshly. He was stranded in Lagos, without money or shelter. The meager funds he had upon arrival had been spent during his 2-week stay at Ekene's apartment. Now, he had nothing left. As desperation began to creep in, he remembered Julius, his former boss, who had helped him travel abroad years ago. It was a long shot, but it was the only option Carlo could think of. Luckily for Carlo, he had maintained communication with Julius while he was abroad. With renewed determination, Carlo approached a group of people waiting at a bus stop. Excuse me, he said, swallowing his pride. I'm in a difficult situation. Could you please spare me some change for transport, please? Some ignored him. Others gave him pitying looks. But a few kind souls reached into their pockets. Naira by naira, Carlo collected enough for a bus fare. As he rode across the city, Carlo's mind raced. Would his boss be happy to see him after settling him by sending him off to America like he requested for? Would he be willing to accommodate him for the night since he didn't inform him before coming into Nigeria? These and many more questions ran through Carlo's mind. Finally, Carlo arrived at the neighborhood where his boss used to live. He walked down the familiar streets, hoping Julius hadn't moved. To his relief, he recognized the house. It looked well maintained. With a deep breath, Carlo approached the gate and knocked. The gateman opened the gate and immediately jumped in excitement as he recognized Carlo. After that, he quickly informed Julius that Carlo was at the gate and wanted to see him. Julius, who was equally excited to see Carlo, asked the gateman to let him in. On sighting Carlo, Julius stood up and opened his arms wide, to which Carlo ran into for a heartfelt embrace. Carlo, my boy, when did you return? You didn't inform me you were coming into the country so that I can send one of my drivers to pick you up at the airport, Julius said. Carlo's shoulders sagged with relief. His boss was still the same kind man he was when he left the country. Sir, it's a long story. A lot has happened, and my chest is heavy. Say no more. You will first go inside and take a bath, and then eat. Then you can tell me all about it. I'll have the housekeeper prepare a room for you, Julius said. Carlo took his bath, ate a good meal after a long time, and ate it to his satisfaction. He then proceeded to tell his boss all that had happened, from his deportation to Ekene's mischievous schemes. Julius listened intently as Carlo poured out his story, his face growing grave with each revelation of Ekene's betrayal. As Carlo finished, Julius sat back, shaking his head in disbelief. Carlo, my boy, Julius said, his voice filled with sympathy. I'm so sorry this has happened to you. Your brother's actions are unforgivable. You have been through a lot, Carlo. Now, what's the next step you want to take? Sir, I want to keep looking for Ekene because he must provide my money. I cannot allow him to render me useless after all that I suffered in America to make money. The only challenge I have is that I don't have any money on me or even a place to lay my head while searching for him. Carlo said. Remembering Carlo's dedication during the time he served him in his automobile shop, Julius made a decision. He excused himself and went into his room and came out with an envelope containing some money. Here, he said, handing the envelope to Carlo. This should help you with your search. And please, stay here as long as you need. My home is always open to you. Carlo's eyes welled with tears of gratitude. Thank you, sir. I don't know how to repay you. Just focus on finding your brother and sorting this out, Julius replied. You have a place here while you search. Meanwhile, across town, Ekene huddled in his friend's spare room, jumping at every sound, convinced that Carlo would find him at any moment. His phone lay on the bed, switched off, a symbol of his cowardice and the broken trust between the brothers. As the night deepened, the two brothers' paths diverged further. Carlo seeking help and a way forward, Ekene hiding from the consequences of his actions, but fate had more twists in store for both of them. With a roof over his head and some financial breathing room, Carlo threw himself into the search for Ekene. Each day, he would return to Ekene's apartment building because he was convinced in his heart that the apartment belonged to Ekene and not his friend. Kalu would arrive in the early morning, positioning himself where he could see the entrance. Hours would pass, the Lagos sun beating down mercilessly, but Kalu remained vigilant. He would watch as residents came and went, studying each face, hoping for a sign of Ekene or his friend that claimed ownership of the apartment. As evening approached, Kalu would linger, his hope dwindling, but his determination unwavering. He would stay until the street lights were turned on, casting long shadows across the now quiet street, before he would take his leave and go back to Julius's house. Days turned into weeks. Carlo became a familiar sight in the neighborhood, his presence sparking curiosity among the people in the area. Some began to take pity on him, offering him water or snacks as he maintained his vigil. Despite the lack of progress, Carlo refused to give up. Each night, he would return to Julius's house, exhausted but resolute. Any luck today? Julius would ask. Not yet, sir, Carlo would say, his voice tired but determined. But tomorrow might be the day, he would say. Meanwhile, Ekene remained in hiding, constantly on edge. He'd only venture out only when necessary, always looking over his shoulder, convinced that Kalu could appear at any moment. The weight of his guilt and fear was taking its toll, leaving him a shell of his former confident self. One day, as the sun was setting over Lagos, Carlo's vigilance finally paid off. His heart raced as he spotted a familiar figure stepping out of a car. It was Ekene, looking furtively around before heading towards his apartment. Without a moment's hesitation, Carlo sprang into action. He sprinted across the street, his feet pounding the pavement as years of pent-up anger and betrayal fueled his pursuit. Ekene, oblivious to the approaching storm, was fumbling with his keys when Carlo held him from the back. Before he could react, Carlo's fist connected with his jaw, sending him reeling backwards. Carlo, Ekene gasped, tasting blood in his mouth. Wait, I can explain. But Carlo was beyond words. Months of frustration, years of deceit, all culminated in this moment. His fists flew, each blow carrying the weight of his shattered dreams and broken trust. Ekene tried to defend himself, but Carlo's rage made him unstoppable. The apartment echoed with the sounds of the scuffle and Ekene's pained cries. As quickly as it began, the fight was over. Ekene lay on the floor, his face swollen and bruised, while Carlo stood over him, chest heaving. "Get up," Carlo growled, grabbing Ekene's arm. "We are going home." Moving swiftly, Carlo snatched the bundle of keys in Ekene's hands. He half dragged, half carried his battered brother to the car, ignoring the shocked stares of neighbors who had been drawn by the commotion. Shoving Ekene into the passenger seat, Carlo got behind the wheel. The engine roared to life and they peeled out of the compound, leaving behind the scene of their confrontation. As they sped through Lagos traffic, heading towards the village, a tense silence filled the car. Ekene, nursing his injuries, darted fearful glances at his brother. Carlo's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched as he focused on the road ahead. "Carlo, please, I can explain. Please pull over and give me some minutes, and I will tell you everything," Ekene pleaded. "You had your chance, but you screwed it up. I'm done with your dribbling. When we get home to Papa and Mama, you can explain to them what you did with all the money I sent to you," Carlo replied angrily. After hours of driving, the car rolled to a stop in front of their old village hut. Carlo stepped out of the car, his face set in grim determination. He walked around to the passenger side and yanked open the door. "Out!" he commanded Ekene. "It's time to face the truth." Their parents and Amara rushed out, eyes wide with shock and confusion at the sight before them. "Carlo, what happened? Why is Ekene like this?" their mother cried out, her voice trembling. Carlo, still sitting with anger, recounted the tale of Ekene's deception in the city. He told them of the lies, the fake investments, and how Ekene had abandoned him, leaving him to suffer alone in Lagos. As the story unfolded, expressions of disbelief and anger flickered across the faces of their family members. Their father, though visibly upset, raised a hand to calm the situation. "Ekene needs time to heal," he said. "Carlo, I know you are angry, but let your brother recover. After a few days, we will all sit down and he will answer for his actions." Reluctantly, Carlo agreed. For 3 tense days, the family waited, an uneasy quiet settling over the compound. Ekene, confined to his room, nursed his injuries and dreaded the confrontation to come. On the 4th day, with Ekene's bruises faded but still visible, the family gathered. The air was thick with anticipation as Ekene was called to account for his actions. "Ekene," their father began, his voice heavy with authority. "Explain yourself. What happened to all the money Carlo sent for our care and for building houses in the village and in the city?" Ekene's eyes darted nervously around the room, unable to meet the accusing gazes of his family. I made mistakes," he began hesitantly. As Ekene spoke, the true extent of his betrayal became clear. He confessed to using the money not for its intended purposes, but to fund a lavish lifestyle in Lagos. Expensive clothes, night out at clubs, luxurious apartments, all bought with the hard-earned money Carlo had sent home. "And the houses?" Carlo demanded, his voice tight with anger. "Where are they?" Ekene's shoulders slumped. "There are no houses. I never started building them. I used up all the money for myself." A heavy silence fell over the room. The magnitude of Ekene's selfishness and deceit was almost incomprehensible to his family. Their mother wept quietly, while their father's face was a mask of disappointment and anger. Amara looked on in shock, struggling to reconcile this revelation with the brother she thought she knew. Carlo stood, his fists clenched at his sides. "All those years of hard work," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "All the sacrifices I made, thinking I was helping our family. I did not only do multiple odd jobs to make this money. I denied myself of any luxury just so that our lives would change for the better. Many nights I did not sleep, but worked around the clock. And even the nights I did sleep, I slept in store garages so that I could avoid paying rent, Ekene. And this is what you did with all my sweat?" Carlo cried. Ekene could only hang his head in shame, unable to offer any justification for his actions. The room fell silent as Carlo's anguished words hung in the air. His pain and anger were palpable, filling the space with a tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. Tears streamed down Carlo's face, a stark contrast to the fury blazing in his eyes. He wept bitterly. He could not believe that all those years he washed toilets and cleaned dead bodies in America were all in vain. With his eyes very red and his chest rising and falling in anger, he continued, "Ekene, so all those years we lived in abject poverty. You watched as our parents suffered to provide for us. You did not consider that before squandering the money I sent to you. You were so wicked that you did not even for once give our parents a little money to eat, knowing how hard life has been for them. You instead left them here to wallow in poverty and suffering. Since you threw away blood relations to spend the money that wasn't yours, I will throw away blood relations to deal with you. You have just one day to provide my money, or you will ever regret knowing who I am." Ekene attempted to speak, but Carlo cut him off sharply. "No, I don't want to hear any more of your excuses. You had years to do the right thing, years to help our parents, but you chose yourself every single time." Ekene, visibly shaken by his brother's outburst, seemed to shrink further into himself. The weight of his actions and their consequences finally appeared to be sinking in. Their father, sensing the escalating tension, tried to intervene. "Carlo, my son, I understand your anger, but..." "No, Papa," Carlo interrupted, his resolve evident in his voice. "This goes beyond forgiveness. Ekene needs to face the consequences of his actions." Turning back to Ekene, Carlo delivered his ultimatum, his voice cold and determined. "You have one day, Ekene, one day to come up with my money. I don't care how you do it, but if you don't, you will see a side of me you never knew existed." With that, Carlo stormed out of the room, leaving behind a stunned family. Their mother began to weep openly, while their father sat heavily in his chair with his walking stick, looking older than ever before. Ekene, pale and trembling, looked around the room, seeming to search for sympathy, but finding none. The gravity of his situation was clear. He had one day to make things right, or face consequences he couldn't even begin to imagine. As the one-day ultimatum drew to a close, Ekene's desperation reached its peak. Tears streaming down his face, he fell to his knees before Carlo, his voice choked with sobs. "Please, brother, forgive me. Give me time to make things right. I know I've done wrong, but I swear I will repay everything." Carlo stood unmoved, his face a mask of stone as he watched his brother grovel. The thought of how he struggled abroad to make money and now nothing to show for it had hardened his heart against Ekene's tears. In a last effort, Ekene made a confession. "The apartment in Lagos, it's mine. I bought it with some of the money you sent. Take it, please. Take the apartment and the car too. I will work hard. I will do whatever it takes to pay back the rest." For a moment, a flicker of surprise crossed Carlo's face, but it quickly faded as he calculated the value of these offerings against the years of sacrifice and the mountain of money he had sent home. It was a pittance, a drop in the ocean of his brother's deceit. "Is that all?" Carlo's voice was cold, devoid of emotion. "After everything, this is what you offer?" Ekene's hope crumbled at the icy tone of his brother's voice. He realized with a sinking heart that his meager offering had done nothing to sway Carlo's judgment. Unbeknownst to Ekene, Carlo had already made his decision. The bonds of brotherhood, once strong and unbreakable, had been corroded by years of lies and betrayal. In Carlo's mind, Ekene was no longer family. He was merely the architect of his suffering, deserving of whatever fate befell him. Without another word, Carlo snatched the keys to the Lagos apartment from Ekene's trembling hands. He then turned and walked out of the house, the car keys jangling in his pocket. The family watched in stunned silence as Carlo strode to the car, his movements purposeful and determined. The engine roared to life, and within moments, a cloud of dust masked his departure from the compound. But Carlo wasn't heading back to Lagos. Instead, he turned the car towards a part of the village rarely spoken about, the domain of the feared native doctor. As he drove, his mind was focused on one thing: retribution. The road became rougher, the surroundings more overgrown. Few ventured this far into the bush, but Carlo pressed on. His determination to useless Ekene's life had led him to seek powers beyond the mundane. As the native doctor's compound came into view, obscured by thick foliage and an aura of foreboding, Carlo felt a chill run down his spine. For a brief moment, he hesitated. Was he really prepared to go this far? But then, memories of his hardships flooded back. The humiliation of menial jobs, the sacrifices he made, all wasted by Ekene's greed and lies. His resolve strengthened. Carlo stepped out of the car, his footsteps heavy as he approached the compound. The air seemed to thicken, filled with the promise of dark rituals and irreversible consequences. Carlo stood before the native doctor's shrine, his hand poised to knock. A moment of hesitation gripped him, his conscience waging a final battle against his desire for revenge. The weight of what he was about to do pressed heavily on his shoulders. As he raised his hand to knock on the door, memories flooded back. Nights spent shivering in the cold American streets, the back-breaking labor of menial jobs, the indignity of cleaning public toilets and handling dead bodies. Each recollection stoked the fire of his resentment, reminding him of the countless sacrifices he had made for a better life, sacrifices that Ekene had carelessly squandered. Whatever happened next would change both their lives forever. The door creaked open, and Carlo stepped into the shadowy interior, leaving behind the last vestiges of brotherly love and embracing a path of vengeance that would reshape their family's future in ways he could not imagine. As he stepped into the room, he was met with a dimly lit interior, thick with the pungent aroma of herbs and incense. The native doctor stood before him, an imposing figure, draped in a white and red wrapper. "Enter," the native doctor said. his voice low and gravely. Carlo stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. Shadows danced on the walls, cast by flickering oil lamps. "Speak!" the native doctor commanded, settling onto a low stool. Carlo's words came in a rush, spilling out like a dam that had just busted. He recounted his years of hardship in America, the back-breaking work, the humiliations endured. His voice trembled with emotion as he described sending money home, believing he was securing a future for his family, only to discover Ekene's betrayal. The native doctor listened impassively, his dark eyes unreadable. When Kalu finished, a silence hung in the air for a long moment. "What would you have me do?" the native doctor finally asked. Kalu hesitated, the magnitude of his decision weighing on him, but the bitterness in his heart won out. With a heavy sigh, he spoke the words that would change everything. "Make my younger brother, Ekene, mad." The native doctor nodded solemnly, showing no surprise at the request. Without a word, he rose and began to gather various items from around the room: herbs, powders, small carved figurines. Carlo watched, a mix of fascination and horror gripping him as the native doctor began a series of chants and rituals. "Say his name 3 times, the native doctor said. "Ekene Nnamani, Ekene Nnamani, Ekene Nnamani." The air in the shrine seemed to thicken, charged with an unseen energy. Carlo felt a chill run down his spine as the native doctor's movements became more frenzied, his chants rising to a pitch. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The native doctor turned to Carlo. "It is done," he said simply. Carlo fumbled with his pockets, producing a wad of cash. He handed it to the native doctor with shaking hands, the weight of what he had just done already weighing him down. Without another word, Carlo stumbled out of the shrine and into the harsh sunlight. He made his way to the car, his movements mechanical, his mind reeling. As he started the engine and pointed the car towards Lagos, Carlo tried to convince himself that he had done the right thing. But a small voice in the back of his mind whispered doubts, wondering if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The road to Lagos stretched out before him, a path that would lead him away from the village, away from Ekene, and into an uncertain future shaped by the dark deed he had just set in motion. But what Carlo didn't know was that making Ekene mad was not the only thing the native doctor did. His actions was about to affect not only Ekene, but other aspects he never thought of. You don't want to miss the concluding part of the story, dropping shortly. In the meantime, please like, share and subscribe to my channel, and do let me know what you think about the story in the comment section, because I love hearing from you. Until I come your way again soon, stay happy.